This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. Today, I'm your host, Kara Szymborski, here with two turtles who walk through a puddle of radioactive sludge, Danny Martinez.
Cowabunga, dude.
And Kate Scotchless.
Hello.
So we got a great topic for our show today. As you can tell, we've got an unusual lineup because our great overlord, Mike, got a flight cancellation. He's enjoying the sweet summer of success of travel for everybody going on. And our usual stand-in extra special host, Paul, is celebrating his birthday all month long and is unavailable for comment at this time.
As he should.
It's the summer of Paul. Summer of Paul, we call it here.
So we got a great topic for you guys today. We're going to talk about anthropomorphic animals in comics. ... This is not a furry show, but if that's your bag, that's just fine. You can go enjoy your Sonic the Hedgehog comics. We will be over here talking about additional anthropomorphic animal comics. But before we get into it, we do want to remind you that on August 20th at 8 p.m. Eastern, we are having an I Read Comic Books podcast Discord hangout. So definitely join us for that. And before we get into the show, we're going to get into our favorite legally mandated question. How are you, and how have comic books been? Let's start with you, Kate.
I have been good. I have done a bunch of reading for the show's topic so I will not get into that, all of my fun animal comics. But I also finished Nice House on the Lake, Volume 1. Oh my God, this book is so good. Speaking of Paul, he is my hero for recommending it and making me read it for the show. This is the book by James Tynion, Alvaro Martinez Bueno, who did cover art, arts and inks, and Jordi Belair, who did colors. Beautiful, fascinating, so creepy in the best way. I did go ahead and get the first 3 volumes of Something Is Killing the Children out of the library to try and stop myself from purchasing the issues of the volume 2, because volume 2 isn't out for a while because it's ongoing. And I'm like, no, you can't start buying singles of this. You have to wait. So I'm trying to curtail my need by reading Something Is Killing the Children, which is another creepy Tynion mystery that I've heard is good. So fingers crossed, this scratches that itch.
If you run out of that, you can start Department of Truth, which is another Tynion book. So just keep that in your list.
I read volume 1 because of Mike, and that one is very good. And volume 2 of that is on Hoopla. So that is actually a very good recommendation that I should follow because, yes, the library is where it's at and where we need to stay because moving is so expensive, friends. It is so expensive. Holy crap.
Crazy.
I know, right? Between that and my cat has an ear infection that we've now treated twice and it keeps coming back. So it was time to do the expensive testing to see exactly what is growing in her petri dish of an ear. And spent all the money on this kitty, but hopefully it tells us what exactly she needs to feel better.
Your list of Tynion books is like a list of books for me to avoid because I read Mimetic a million years ago, and I keep talking about it because it's been I read it when it first came out and I haven't read it since, but it's burned into my brain because it made me want to throw up because that's how creepy it was. So whenever I see him writing something now, I'm just like, nope, hard pass, thank you.
Yeah, that's one of those books that I have because of a Humble Bundle of how you unintentionally accrue a hoarder's pile of digital comics because of Humble Bundle. It's one of those ones that's sat there for years and years and years because of that.
I mean, it's good, but well.
It escalates quickly,
okay.
Very quickly.
How about you guys?
Well, I would like to talk about a comic that I didn't read because it's garbage. And I know that we try to keep things just focused on things that we like on this show. Sometimes it's good to drag a really worthy opponent. So one of my favorite movies ever is Mad Max Fury Road. And I realized the other day that it had been a while since I rewatched it. And I had recently heard about the kind of like the making of book that like explains how the movie like almost didn't get made that came out recently. And so I was like, okay, well, I have to rewatch the movie before I get the book out from the library. So let's do this. And while watching the movie, which is great, and if you haven't seen it for some reason, please prioritize it like right now, it just made me think about that horrible, horrible prequel comic that DC put out about Furiosa, where her backstory is that she was raped. And it was just so poorly done and so gross and such lazy storytelling. Like, I didn't feel like I needed a Furiosa backstory. Like, she's basically the main character of Mad Max Fury Road, and she's helping a group of women escape their patriarchal oppressor. And so to have her backstory be so like directly and grossly tied up in all that just skeeved me out so much. So watching the movie, I was just like, God damn it, you had such a good thing. And then you had to go and just say, you know what'll make this better? Sexual assault. like we already know it's there. It's already implied. We don't need to get into it more, guys.
Yeah.
But what I did read as a total palate cleanser and kind of related to our topic today is DC League of Super Pets, The Great Mx-Up by Heath Corson with art by Bobby Timoni. And I'm pretty sure this is just like because of the new Super Pets movie that came out, and DC was like, look guys, we have comic books too. You should read them. So it's the Super Pets versus Mr. Mxy-Up, which they do include the pronunciation in the comic book, just in case you're unsure of how to say something that's all consonants. So this is one of Superman's greatest and most hilarious foes, depending on the story. So Mr. Mxy-Up is an imp from the fifth dimension who likes popping in and causing chaos. Like I think he's from the same dimension as Batmite, so like that kind of wackiness. And so we are introduced to this graphic novel, clearly written for children, but also delightful as an adult if you wish comic books could be fun again. Because I feel like with a lot of superhero comics, I read them and I'm just like, you're trying to tell a serious story. Good for you. But I'm not entertained. And this was very entertaining. Like, each of the Justice League members has a pet with superpowers that like accompanies them on missions. And some of them make sense. Like, you know, we have Ace the Bat Hound and Crypto the Superdog, which hilariously, Crypto the Superdog wears glasses when Clark Kent is wearing glasses. And Batman's like, Superman, why is this? And he's like, well, the glasses work for me, so if Crypto's wearing them, people won't realize he's Crypto the Superdog. Like, great comic book logic. Love it. Wonder Woman has a pig that the pig's powers, it could change size. So like Wonder Woman's riding the pig around, or like the pig grows really big and then like drops on top of a bad guy. And it's like, if I was a kid, I would be dying with laughter over all of this. Like, and the pig is so sweet too. It just keeps being like, look, Wonder Woman, look how much fun we're having. So the animals are speaking their animal language and can't communicate with the humans. And the humans think like, oh, look at my cute little pet. And the animals are like, we can smell Lex Luthor from 6 blocks away. Let's go. And they're like, oh, you want walkies? It's just like that kind of humor. And then the plot picks up when Mr. Mxy-Up appears and turns the Justice League into animals, and suddenly they can communicate with their pets and they have to work together to stop the bad guy. But it's like super cute. It, like, again, clearly for kids, but I enjoyed it as an adult. I think one of my favorite jokes was that Flash's pet is a turtle, and when Flash gets turned into an animal, he gets turned into a rabbit. And I was like, we're doing a tortoise in the hair thing. Okay. And I am not counting this comic towards our theme, because although the animals can talk to each other, they are very clearly like animals, not like, some of them are wearing like elements of their owner's costumes, but they're not like dressed like humans or in like human houses as animals, as some of the other stuff that we'll be talking about. And we'll get into our theme more later. But while I was reading this, I was very resolute and like, no, this doesn't count for the theme. I can talk about this too. How about you, Danny? What did you read?
Well, I just want to say, if you like that comic, I think you'll really enjoy the movie. I had a really good time
Oh yeah,
watching the League of Super Pets. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Sounds like this comic happens after that, so I need to go chase this down.
a sequel.
Because you're right, the animals are hilarious. The Flash having a turtle that can't see, or that has to wear glasses, is amazing. So yeah, I love it. Um, but I've been well. I'm glad to see. First of all, I'm glad to be here during this my first official episode.
Yeah,
Which I'm
welcome.
glad. Yeah, I'm glad. We in my contract I put in that I don't. Let's make sure to not have any episodes with Mike. So I'm
Ah.
glad that we're starting off strong. I'm just kidding. There's no contract. But yeah, no. And comics have been great. I mean, I read. It was really hard to narrow things down to one or two because I read so much stuff throughout the week. Just an insane amount of things that some are good, some are bad, some I just don't talk about them after I read them because you know there's no point in dwelling on it. But
Secret shame? Secret shame? I have secret shame reads.
it's not so much. Yeah, it's not that. It's just that like if I don't like a comic, I don't. I rather not talk about it because
Yeah.
I don't want people to think like, oh, maybe I should go read that. Or if that was somebody, so like somebody liked that book a lot, like I don't want to stomp on it and be like, yeah,
Right.
that book was not good. And they're like, oh, that was my favorite book. Like and so to avoid those kinds of things.
Yeah, I agree.
But I did read some cool stuff. First of all, I read Moon Knight Volume 2, Too Tough to Die, by Jed McKay, with art by Alessandro Cappuccio and Federico Sabatini, colors by Rachel Rosenberg, and letters by Corey Petit. So this is a continuation of the most recent Moon Knight. And Moon Knight is facing the impossible when he tries to. There's some assassins that have infiltrated his midnight mission that he set up in his neighborhood because that's all he wants to do now. Make sure that the people in his neighborhood have a safe place to go, which is. It doesn't sound very Moon Knight from the stuff I've read before, but I'm glad they're kind of moving in this direction.
Well, I mean,
Um,
his whole deal is that he's charged with protecting travelers of the night. So that's actually probably the most effective thing he could be doing as a superhero.
yep, yep. And the book has like vampires and stuff, which is cool because can Moon Knight work with a vampire? Who knows? So stuff like that. So
Is
I
the
really like
vampire
that.
Morbius?
It's not. It's a different. These are newly turned vampires from Volume One, which is crazy because like they never didn't choose to be vampires, but now they are. So like, can Moon Knight help them? So it was a nice twist on like, yeah, Moon Knight's just gonna stomp out the vampires because that's what Khonshu has them do. So I really like it. I like Jed McKay's writing a lot. So this was like no question I was gonna read this, and they introduced a new villain called Zodiac because of course. And yeah, he's been putting him through the ringer. So I'm really excited for whatever's happening next. But this volume was really fun. The art is beautiful. Like both Cappuccio and Sabatini, just like they have this really cool, loose, dynamic style that really fits with like, especially with the cape and the suit, or when Mr. Knight shows up, like it all looks very slick. So I really, really like it.
Danny, would you say that this is a good comic for people who have watched the show and want to read more Moon Knight to do, or do they need to jump in a different spot?
No, I think if you want to start from the number one from Jed McKay, I think this is a great, not really continuation from the show, but definitely you can see some of the parallels of like, okay, this is what else Mark can do and all that. So
Mm-hmm.
I also read just real quick, Batman One Dark Knight, issues 1, 2, and 3 from DC Black Label. This is the book by Jacques. Jacques is one of my favorite cover artists. He's like when he does interiors, I get very excited because you don't get to see it a lot. And now that he's writing this book, like I don't know if you guys are familiar with the movie 16 Blocks, where they have to get from like one side of the city to the other one. That's what this book is. Like Batman has to get this villain to Blackgate, but there's a blackout in the city. All the gangs are after this one villain, and Batman
Yes.
has to protect them. Yeah,
This sounds great. This sounds like I recently watched, I think it's called 21 Bridges. It was that Chadwick Boseman movie where they're like, we have to shut down the entire island of Manhattan to get the one bad guy. And as somebody who grew up like 30 minutes away from New York City, I'm like, literally, this would never happen. This is the dumbest film premise. And then I watched it and I was like, this is compelling storytelling. Yes, it would never happen, but it's fun to think about.
yeah. Yeah, so this is just that, and it's like it's in the summer in Gotham, so it's hot, and there's a blackout, so there's no electricity anywhere, and people are going crazy, and all this like all these shadows and all that really works for Jock's art style, because it's all very like shadowy and also very painterly, especially when he goes in the sewers. Like when Batman goes in the sewers and Jock is drawing it, it's insane. Like there should not be any like other artists should stay away from the sewers if Jock just put out a book. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure it's going to be a beautiful collection because DC Black Label's been doing some really nice hardcovers, which is why I tried not to buy the singles anymore. But these I wanted the individual covers.
Yeah. No, that's like the kind of thing where I'm like glad that the big two, whenever they try something a little bit new like that, to make it be like, look, guys, you don't need to be reading the 50 comic books that took place before this in order to enjoy this story with the character that you enjoy.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the strength of the Black Label is that it's all out of continuity. Usually they're just like one and done stories, so like you can just jump in and not have to buy like 20 volumes prior to, or like no Infinite Crisis to worry about, none of that.
But if you're into that kind of thing, you can subscribe to our Patreon and join Paul for his deep dive into Grant Morrison's entire Batman run, A Better Batmobile, which I think we've all done an episode of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you do want to read all of the comics, you can do that on our additional shows. But let's talk about what comic books we're reading next. What's on the top of your pile? New comics come out on Wednesdays, and in our Discord chat for our live show that takes place on Sundays, we've got Jeff saying he's reading Drops of God Volume 4, which is a manga all about wine and is part of Comixology Unlimited and Kindle Prime reading. So if you've got one of those and would like to learn about wine while reading a comic book, you could definitely check out Drops of God. Danny, what are you reading next?
True to my brand, I'm reading the Marvel summer event, Axe Judgment Day. That's Avengers, X-Men, and Eternals Judgment Day number 2. By I love the title already because it's like, no, it's not. It's usually like A versus B. This is A versus B versus C. Like we have to get more people involved in the mess.
I saw Axe Judgment and I thought you were going to say there was a new Axe Cop comic book out that I needed to know about. This is very different.
Yeah, not yet. But this is by Kieran Gillen and Valerio Schiti, so like really beautiful art. Kieran Gillen has been some really wicked stuff with, no pun intended, some really wicked stuff with the event and just all the build up to the event. So highly recommend if you like those big blockbuster summer events from Marvel. This is one you don't want to miss because the premise of this is like the Eternals, their whole purpose, if you watch the movie or read the comics before, they have to remove the excess deviations, the deviants. And now that the X-Men are immortal, they just like, oh, I guess they fall into that category. I think we need to now get rid of the mutants. We need to get rid of mutants. Yes. So like it all kind of, it's moving in that direction. The funniest part is that the Avengers, Earth's mightiest heroes, are just kind of there, caught in the middle of it because they're like, I don't know, like who do we side with? So yeah, it's really interesting.
I hope they play it up as a farce. Like this is definitely sounding like one of the comics in the grand tradition of, because of reasons, your favorite heroes have to fight each other.
Yeah.
But
it's weird because the Eternals are also immortal because they can just kind of come back over and over. So like, how do we get to the end of a fight if both teams can just kind of keep coming back? So yeah, but the first issue was just like, I don't know, it felt like kind of blew my mind as I was reading it. I was like, oh man, they're really going hard on this. Like, and yeah, of course they could retcon everything in the future, but I'm kind of enjoying the ride while I'm going on it. So,
all right, Kate, what about you? What's next on your pile?
Well, I like to, march to the beat of my own drummer. Like I like to be go against the crowd, not one to go with the stream. The popular things are just not for me. So I was thinking of picking up Sandman Volume 1. Because I heard that this little known under the radar show came out recently, and So jokes aside, I read volume 1 and 2 many years ago and was meaning to actually reread volume 1 before the show came out, but then life happened. You know how it goes. And so I am still intending to read this. I'm probably going to read this after the show today, actually. So the first volume is Preludes and Nocturnes, and it was the first 8 issues that came out from Vertigo when this was originally published, by obviously Neil Gaiman, with illustrations by Sam Keith, Mike Durgenberg, and Malcolm Jones III, colored by Robbie Bush and lettered by Todd Klein. I remember really liking volume 1 and being more grossed out by volume 2, but I don't think I could tell you the exact plot, like detail. It's been long enough. But basically, I remember like his mask gets stolen and he has to like regain his or helmet or something like that has his powers. But I just think it'd be fun to read it before watching the show. And it's strange that when I went to get this from my library, it was already checked out, because you'd think these little known books at this time especially would be available. So luckily this is available on all sorts of digital platforms for free. So I can just, right now I'm going to get it on the DC Comics app. But have you guys read this series at all?
I never read it because enough like older dudes said it was their favorite. And
oh yeah, that'll be a turnoff for sure.
Generally when older dudes tell me a comic book is their favorite, I'm like, oh, like I got a lot of that for Watchmen. Like you have to read Watchmen. Yep. And like Watchmen is undeniably great, but it's also like really gross
really
in so many ways. Yeah. But so Sandman, I was just kind of like, oh, put that in that category. But now that I know more about Neil Gaiman's work, like I'm willing to give it a shot. And he's been doing like the press rounds recently talking about the show because he's very involved with it. Mm-hmm. And the things that he says about it make me actually interested in this very popular series for the first time like ever. One of the things I liked, he gave an interview to the New York Times Magazine, and something I really liked about that interview is the interviewer was asking him like, hey, you know, like what do we do if like science cracks dreams and like why we have dreams and what the meaning of our dreams really is? And he was like, well, I don't want that, because then I can't do my job. Like my job is to make stuff up. Like I can't do that if we have the answers. Like it's the same reason I wouldn't want to know like there's proof of God or something like that. Like I while I have he was basically like, while I have my imagination, I could make these characters whoever I want them to be, but once we have facts, I have to pay attention to those. So no, thank you. I would like the mystery.
I really like Neil Gaiman's novels. I've read a bunch of his books. So I've read way more of his prose than I have of his comics. Like I think I've read all of his short story collections at this point, and most of his novels. I have not read Anasazi Boys yet. I think that's the only one I'm missing.
I've read a bunch of Sandman, but it's kind of been scattered. The one I remember the most is Volume 4, Seasons of the Mist, which I always call Season of the Witch because of the song. But that's like the one where you finally get it's got a big thing to do with hell and Lucifer and Constantine. So like that one's the one I remember the most. Mm-hmm. I did watch the first episode of the show. I really liked it, but I want to pace myself because I don't want to run through 10 episodes. And then not have anything else to watch as good as that. So, but I think as I was watching it, I was remembering the stuff like, oh, I've read this stuff before. Like it's all kind of a big messy in my head. It's just blurry, like all over the place. So
much like dreams. So I guess that works.
Yeah, I love it. I love the imagery too. It's so cool, and the art in all the Sandman books. Like, I can't believe they got so many like artists that just really nail the dreamscape and all that.
How about you, Kara? What have you read? Or what are you going to read, rather?
What am I going to read? All right, so a bunch of months ago, this show recommended Daily Report About My Witch Senpai by Maka Mochida. And after, waiting to see if it would pop up at the library and realizing that would not happen, I then waited for a Barnes & Noble sale. And I finally have a copy of Daily Report About My Witch Senpai, which is billed as a sweet workplace romance, except the senpai, or like mentor boss figure, is a witch. And I I really enjoyed that on like the back cover where they have like the summary of the story. It's like the guy who like works with this witch is just like, she's just doing too much to help people. She's got to put herself first. And I'm just like, okay, I'm here for this positive narrative. So it just looks delightful and charming, and like I'm definitely in a moment where I want my comic books to be fun.
Mm-hmm.
This feels like it's going to be a very fun book. So we are going to take a short break and then get into our show topic. This is not a furry podcast. Our favorite animals and anthropomorphized characters in comics. And we're back to the I Read Comic Books podcast show. Today's topic: what are our favorite animals and anthropomorphized characters in comics? What are our favorite animal-based comics? So we're going to start off by talking about what actually fits into this category, because we've been chatting about this in our little group text for a couple weeks now, trying to figure out what do we actually talk about, because when you think about it, there are so many animal characters in comic books. So what fits this specific like anthropomorphized animal definition? What do you think, Kate?
I mean, the thing that came to mind immediately were books like The Dam Keeper, where literally all the characters are humans in animal bodies, basically, where it's like, you know, Mr. Scary's world, where and usually that means that they're the character, the personality traits are somehow tied to the character, what type of animal the character is. But then, like you said, start stretching it a little more. I'm like, okay, what about comics where there's mostly humans, but there's a few sentient animals? And what about comics like Fable, which is basically the same thing, but like mostly you're in human form, but you're also a wolf, you know, like stuff like that. So it did, once I started thinking about it, got more and more into like, oh, this actually encompasses a lot of different books.
Because then it's like, well, if you're, for example, the character that you're referencing in Fables, who's the big bad wolf, but is also a cop, it's like, okay, well, does that make you a shapeshifter then, as opposed to an anthropomorphized animal?
Yeah.
Danny,
what was your take on this?
I was trying to focus on like, okay, how do we define this, and like what plus, you know, trying to add what do I want to read, and I try to focus on characters that are animals but also have like a job or a profession or a career or like a hobby.
Like no deadbeat animals.
That's right.
You know, human stuff.
You know, make something of yourself, be useful to society. But that also, you have to wear human clothes. That was another one of my check marks. But yeah, I think mainly, and once we kind of start talking about all the things I read for this, you'll see definitely that kind of pattern of like, oh, this could have been people, I guess, for most of these stories, but they're not. We kind of chose to tell them with animal-based characters. But I'm surprised to look at you guys' list as well, because I don't know, some of that stuff kind of fell outside of my purview, so I'm interested to talk about how we got there.
Yeah, I kind of fell into if it's basically a person except it's an animal, that fits into this category. Like if you have people clothes and people houses and are walking upright and doing people things, like generally that's kind of where I fell with this category. Yeah. But that said, I was shocked at myself for, again, we were chatting about this in our group text about like does this topic even mean. It didn't even occur to me to include the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which might be like the most anthropomorphized animal, because they are animals that have human-ish bodies, sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, not to mention all the manga animals that have like boobs, which is really weird.
We needed them to have extra mammary glands.
Mm-hmm.
Oh
If
my,
they don't have human sex characteristics, how do we know what gender they are?
that's a big question for the podcast. Yeah.
I mean, just terrible. But I mean, animals have been used in storytelling basically since the dawn of time. Like you look at all the these gods across different religions that have some kind of like a human with animal characteristics or features, or things like Aesop's fables, where
Mhm.
animals themselves take on human traits and storytelling narratives. So at first I was thinking like, oh yeah, animals in comics, so unique. And I thought about it for about 5 seconds and I was just like,
Yeah.
no, we use animals in all our storytelling
Not so
because it's
much.
fun.
It's fun and it's easy shorthand for the the clever fox and the sly snake and the
Yeah, I was thinking about I was like, dang, you can really go back to like Genesis in the Bible, and that snake
Yeah.
is straight up talking to Eve and saying,
Yeah.
yo, you should eat this apple. This is a good apple.
The
Sorry,
Greeks
excuse
also
me,
use that a
fruit.
lot. Yeah, the
Yeah.
Greeks also use that a lot. The Minotaur like comes to mind immediately. Like, and so a lot of animals, like Cersei was the queen of turning people into animal or animal hybrids.
Yeah, while going on this comic book reading journey to explore the world of these anthropomorphized animals, what animals did you like notice any common themes with animals that you were drawn to in particular? Because I know for me it's mice. Like all the first books that I thought of immediately, I was like Mouse Guard, Mice Templar, that other one that I can't remember.
Mouse guard. Mouse.
Yeah, I noticed. I mean, I think there was a distinction between what I'm drawn to and then what everyone, like all these creators, seem to be focused on. Especially from all the stuff that I read, I saw a big through line of like people love rabbits. Like we just want rabbits to be humans, and I don't know what it is, but all the stuff I read had an anthropomorphized rabbit, and they were, for the most part, the good guy. Which I can see that. I love rabbits. They seem pretty chill. Unless you're Bugs Bunny, then you get a little mischievous. But other than that, like I've never met an evil rabbit.
Yeah, I noticed a theme with mice and bears. And then I intentionally, after reading Beastars Volume 1, thanks to Danny, went looking for another wolf main character and read Fables, which I will say, before reading it, I thought was going to have a bunch of anthropomorphized animal characters in it, and turned out to have almost none, which, whoops, there's basically the little pig who keeps, like, running away from the farm upstate and, like, crashing on his couch. And then there's Bigby, who like once shifts into a wolf. So ultimately, not a lot of wolf action there, but still was a good. You notice when you read a bunch of these, the like consistency between how the animals are depicted. Like in both Fables and Beastars, the main character that's a wolf is like a loner and kind of gritty and like can sense things and knows things that others aren't picking up on and stuff like that. Which is interesting, especially because these authors are from completely different cultures.
Yep.
So I think that kind of goes towards that universality, like shorthand of using animal characters.
Your description of those two characters just made me think, oh, so he's the bad boy in a young adult fantasy romance book.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It is oh shoot, it's Edward and team Jacob. There we go. It is Jacob.
Who was also a wolf. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Can I tell you guys that I don't normally dream about fictional characters. I definitely had a dream about Jacob last night. He was on a motorcycle.
Oh boy.
So can you guys please explain Beastars to me, because you keep dropping really, really questionable panels into our chat, and I just What are you reading? Why did you do this to yourselves?
Yeah, Danny, explain yourself.
So, as I was preparing for this, I was reading. I pulled up some. I guess what I would call more classic comics to read. But then I was like, I want to read something off the beaten path, maybe a manga or something like that. And I remember Beastars was one of the things. There was another one called it's called BNA. I forget what it stands for. But that one's not. It's an anime, but I don't think it's a manga, or the manga wasn't available. Either way, oh yeah, brand new animal. Thanks, Brian. Brian with us in the chat. But yeah, so I was trying to read both of those, and I only found Beastars. So I just bought Volume 1. Volume 1 is written and drawn by Paru Itagaki, and it really focuses on like this school for students who are all animals, either herbivores or carnivores, and kind of the conflict between them, especially because at the beginning of this, I guess, school year, one of the kids from drama club, who all our main characters are in drama club, one of the herbivores got eaten by a carnivore. So everyone thinks it's our main character, the wolf, Legoshi. But I feel like I really like this because I feel like they're kind of inverting that trope of like, I think the wolf is not the bad dude in this one. Like, even though he has all the characteristics and that's how everyone perceives him, he doesn't want to be that. So I really, really enjoyed that, and that's kind of why I kept talking about it in the chat. And I'm glad at least I got Kate to go back and read that. But it definitely goes to some places I was not ready for, especially knowing that these are high school students in a drama club.
I think you sold me on it when you said it was, what did you say? It was Mean Girls meets
Glee and
Zootopia.
Yeah.
I was like, shit, now I gotta read it.
Yeah.
Well, Kate, what did you think now that you've explored this world?
I think so. When you refer to me sharing all these screenshots, the phrase that comes to mind is uncomfortably sexual. There was, especially at the end, where Legoshi like captures a dwarf rabbit student, and he's just talking about how small and warm and how much he wants to consume her, and like, but in a very creepy sexual way. I'm like, don't like it. But there's also fun stuff where there's like just stuff sprinkled through, like in kind of the backgrounds of scenes where there's like signs for the different students, like types of students. So there's one scene where they're talking in Legoshi's dorm room, and you can see two signs. One of them says, if your fur gets wet in the rain, deodorize before entering. And the other is like, commitment means sweeping up each other's fur for life. Yes. And there's just like stuff like that throughout the book made it good for me, versus I was definitely not into the weird parts. But also overall the story, it kind of wanders. It, like, you start off with the student getting eaten, but then it very quickly stops being like the whodunit kind of thing and turns into more just like Mean Girls drama. So like,
yeah, it feels like they kind of moved on from the murder, like not too quickly, because they kind of keep talking about it, but like that's a common thing that sometimes happens in that society, and carnivores sometimes eat herbivores, and they like, just be careful next time you go outside.
Guys, this is starting to sound like Riverdale.
Yeah, they set up a shrine at the like spot inside the school where their classmate was consumed by another student.
Ew.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's also this like just mean girl drama of like, there's one scene where the dwarf rabbit gets like basically assaulted by a Harlequin rabbit student who says, listen to me and listen good. He and I are both Harlequin rabbits, and we're an endangered species. We're a lot more valuable than you will ever be.
Wow.
Comic dwarf rabbit has a lot of nerve breaking up a purebred couple. And I'm just like, what the fuck? Wow. And they're both in like schoolgirl uniforms, and you're just like, what?
Oh no.
They bully one of the weasels out of their role in the play, and they make him do like stage work because he was supposed to take over the role of the student who passed away, but instead, like the main the president of the club, who's the big stag, like no, I'll do it, and then you're banished off to like stage work with everyone else. So he's like super upset, but you can't really stand up to the club president because there's a hierarchy. Like if you've read any other manga from like high school stuff, like there's a hierarchy of like student council and all that stuff that you don't want to start poking the bear, no pun intended. uh but and Yeah, Kate just posted a picture in the chat. The mangaka is so good at creating that uneasiness, like with the art, where it's like these really dark backgrounds and they really zoom in on like the snout and the eyes, and it's like, oh my god! As I was reading it too, I was like, oh, this is weird, but I do want to keep reading after the first volume because it ends in a really fun place, I think.
I guess you have to admire the total commitment to the concept. Like you really like these creators really just went for it.
Yeah, I like the dorms, like everyone in the same dorm room has to belong to the same taxonomic family. And that is like an important plot point that like all the Kanide male students are in the same room. So it's like a Labrador Retriever, a Fennec Fox, an Old English Sheepdog, a Coyote, a Spotted Hyena, and then our wolf, Gray Wolf, Fugoshi. And it's like, that's like a key aspect of this school, is that who your roommates are your taxonomic family.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's all I gotta say.
So I think we started on a high note with this.
Okay, well, I'm gonna pivot a little bit and talk about one of my little mice books. I had a thing like a few years ago where I realized that there were several like fantasy adventure books starring characters that were mice. Comic books in particular. So I was like, why mice? Is it because they're so vulnerable and we as humans see ourselves as vulnerable mice in a big bad world where we can't actually control anything that happens to us? And I was like, all right, well, that's a little deep, but let's talk about Mouse Guard. Mouse Guard is a series by David Peterson, and I really like it. Like, if you want a good like fall vibes book, you could do much worse than the first book in this series, which takes place during that season. And so the Mouse Guard are these little medieval-ish mice, and they're actually mice-sized in like the actual world. So when they're like traveling, they're going through like grass and amongst tree roots, and their villains are like a snake that tries to get them, or like a giant crab that looks giant to them but is just like a normal-sized crab. So the Mouse Guard protects mice travelers going from Little Mice Village to Little Mice Village. So I put them very firmly in this anthropomorphized category. I just noticed I've been pronouncing that word anthropomorphized like slightly differently every time I've said it. So one of them has to be right. One of them has to be right. So these little mice.
Yeah. I hope I say it at least correct once in the whole episode.
That's the goal. We'll always pick vocab words we know how to say. So these little mice in the Mice Guard have like little traveling cloaks and little swords. They basically look like hobbits except for they're mice. And what I find interesting about the villains in the series is that you don't really like have the mice talking to the other animals. It's kind of like the mice are in their little mouse world doing their little mice travel-y things. And then there's external threats that they have to face. But it's very sweet. It's definitely an all ages book series. I think there's like 4 volumes in the main series, and then there's like 3 like Legends volumes. But I really like the art style. It's very sweet and but like not cutesy, and the color palette tends to be like a little more muted, so it's just like aside from the fact that these little mice with tiny swords are like trying to stab enormous snakes and stuff, like it's actually a very soothing read just because of like how the art plays out.
It's a beautiful book.
No, totally gorgeous. So that was definitely like the top of books that immediately came to my mind when we were going to be talking about this topic.
Yeah, I remember reading this a little while back. I didn't reread it for the show, but I remember reading it and I was like, oh, this is just like Mouseketeers doing other adventures. So that's immediately what I thought of. So I'm like, I'm in, like, let's go check this out. But I definitely do think I need to go maybe revisit some of these stories because they sound, I mean, just from what I remember, I was like, I like this first volume, but I never continued reading because I don't think there was as much out, or there wasn't like a big hiatus at the time when I finally read that. So
Mm-hmm. Well, Danny, you kind of dove in headfirst with possibly the most anthropomorphic of anthropomorphic animal books when you read Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Usagi Yojimbo, which
yeah. I picked this book because I as I was trying to put some notes together, I know there's rules, right? We can't talk about this stuff forever. So I was like, I can't choose between TMNT and Usagi. Like, you're not gonna make me choose. So they must have had a crossover at some point. Like, just knowing their history and then the animated stuff, like they've had crossovers. So I did find one by Stan Sakai, who better to give us a story about both of them. So it's just called TMNT slash Usagi that does their big crossover. And overall, the story is very simple. And apparently, it's not their first crossover. I wasn't able to find the first one that they had before.
well, Danny, why did this make sense to you as a crossover? Like for our listeners who are not familiar with either property, somehow, can you give a brief synopsis?
Yeah, of course. So Usagi Jimbo, he's a Ronin samurai rabbit. So he goes on missions, protects the town, and fights yokai, who are like kind of demons in that world. And then we have our Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, who have been to Japan. If you watch the third movie as samurai, but that's all you need to know about that movie. But yeah, it just kind of makes sense because I feel like they've been around forever too. So it almost feels like their comic book publishing in real life mirrors almost a little bit like their themes, and obviously they've been around for so long that they were bound to do a crossover. So I just really want to dive into both of them because I really like both.
So how did they fall into this category? So you got Usagi Yojimbo as the rabbit. We've got the turtles as the turtles. Is Usagi Yojimbo like is the rabbitness ever explained? Like the turtles, we have an origin story for. Like they are turtles that have been like mutated into humanoid figures. But what do we know about the rabbit?
So everyone in that world of Usagi, like they're all animals of some kind. So usually, like there's like big pigs and like most of the villains are like not wolves, but just like canine like that. And the snakes, of course, because the snakes have to be the villains. So they were definitely Stan Sakai definitely stuck to a lot of those traits where like we know that wolves and snakes are the bad guys, so the rabbit has to be the hero of the story. But they're all, I mean, they never address like why they're animals. They're just animals. Whereas in the story that I read, they're actually apparently one of the masters for Usagi. He has Usagi gather 4 regular turtles, and then he summons the Ninja Turtles with magic. But he summoned a group of turtles that they've never met before, so from like another dimension, as opposed to the ones they have worked with in the past. It is that part was very confusing because I never read the first crossover, but I just kind of went with it. I'm like, sure, whatever. These are, I mean, I know who each one of them are, right? It's really easy to tell the turtles apart, especially when the book's in color. So I'm not gonna ask too many questions because this is a rabbit samurai and 4 Ninja Turtles, so I'm just gonna go with it.
Kate, you read a book that had a rabbit in it too, right?
I read a couple things. So besides Beastars having a rabbit, obviously, the Iron or the War After, it's all one title, by SM Fadari is all anthropomorphic animals, beautiful watercolors. I read this by complete accident when I went to my first Comic-Con, and I went to one of those stalls that's people selling a bunch of used graphic novels and stuff. So I managed to get this for like $2, and it's a nice hardcover. And it was a little worn, like it had clearly been like it was used, but the pages were all like pristine and everything. So the premise is there's like an intelligent spy from the Resistance is a rabbit named Hardin, and he steals secret information from a military base of the regime, and his actions set off this chain of events that then causes reverberations through the ranks on both sides of this war. And you're looking at how it affects all these different characters and who who's a traitor, who's a spy. So it's like this really intense story that is also very beautiful in animals, but it makes you feel like, oh, it should be like warm and fuzzy, but it is not. It is definitely like a war story. So there was that one. But the main thing I read other than Beastars and Fables was actually Phoebe and Her Unicorn, which I heard about via TikTok, Book Talk. And it's a daily children's comic strip by American cartoonist Dana Simpson. Originally, it was called Heavenly Nostrils and debuted as a webcomic in 2012 on Go Comics, which is a website. And it later became a newspaper strip in over 100 newspapers in 2015 under the current name. And it is basically Calvin and Hobbes for girls. It is so cute. It is so cute. So everyone's a human except the unicorn, but the unicorn is I feel like after reading this, I'm like, it probably doesn't fit her thing because it's not really anthropomorphic because she's just a unicorn and unicorns are just magic and intelligent and can talk. But I can't not talk about it. It's so cute. So our main little heroine is a little 9-year-old girl named Phoebe Howell, who, when she's skipping rocks across the pond, accidentally hits a unicorn in the face with a rock. This is how they meet. And this is actually a good thing because it turns out when unicorns see their own reflection, they get trapped gazing at how beautiful they are. And so it actually frees this unicorn from the trap of her own reflection in the pond. And then unicorn's name is Marigold Heavenly Nostrils, and she gives her one wish for saving her. And the wish Phoebe wishes for is that the unicorn becomes her best friend.
Oh, wholesome.
And so it's very much like Calvin and Hobbes, where there is like an ongoing story, but it is also not an ongoing story, where it's a daily strip. And a lot of them are just little blips. But now you can read these in collected volumes. So I read the very first one. And one of the things that I found so charming as I was reading it, I got this out of my library, and it was one of the most heavily damaged books in the youth graphic novel section, where can see that this pink sparkly cover book has just been manhandled by a million little sticky 8-year-old fingers. And it's just delightful. Just like the Babysitter Club's novels and all the Raina Telgemeier books are just like the most beat up graphic novels in the kids section. So clearly this is popular. And but it's very sweet. They do all sorts of things together, and just like Calvin and Hobbes, where they're like on their adventures, and just like Calvin and Hobbes, like other people can't see and hear the unicorn in a way but in this one it's like, because there's magic that keeps people from seeing and realizing the awesomeness of unicorns and stuff like that. But she's very like princessy, prima donna-y, and it's fun. It's sweet. It's when you need a palate cleanser and it's available, which is hard because it's so popular. If you're like me, you'll have to put it on hold. Then this is a fun one. You can also just go to the webcomic still, though. It is just available online.
I'm definitely going to be reading this. I was the horse girl who wasn't actually ever around horses, so I just read everything that I could get my hands on that was about horses and or unicorns, and I just like loved all the unicorn narratives about like, well, I feel like especially in the 80s and 90s, which ended up being a lot of the written material that I read, a lot of authors were really leaning hard into the whole like, well, unicorns really like girls. Like unicorns only appear to little girls. Like if you're a little girl, you too could be special, and a unicorn could appear to you. And and then I think the first time that I saw like unicorns can interact with boys also was in the Harry Potter series, actually. Like the gang meets unicorns, and the Care of Magical Creatures teacher is like, well, they do prefer girls, but like I guess the boys could touch them too. And you're like, okay.
That's funny. I didn't even think about that. I think that's the first time I saw that too.
Yeah. And like, of course, there's all like the iconography of unicorns wrapped up in the whole like purity thing. Yeah. And so like only a virgin could find a unicorn. Meh, meh, meh. But like, it was nice to have something where it was like, oh, like something about being a girl that's special. I could find a unicorn.
Do you remember Rainbow Bright's horse? That I think was like the peak of my horse girl little 8-year-oldness. With the rainbow mane and tail.
I mean, once you have a rainbow mane and tail, I mean, that for me is the Lisa Frank unicorn interpretation with like the two unicorns like jumping over the moon. All about that. And then of course the animated film version of The Last Unicorn, which the older I got and the more I watched that, the more I'm like, wow, this was really billed as a children's movie. This film with lots of boobs is billed as a children's film. Okay.
Brian wants to know what Danny's horse girl experience was like growing up.
Well, my unicorns had a sword coming out instead of a horn because it was cool, and there was chains all over the place. Because that's what little boys like, apparently. I don't know. I like unicorns too. I'm just gonna throw that out there. I think it's cool to have a horn, a magical horn, nonetheless. So
I was gonna say, horses are amazing. What's better than a horse? A magical horse. Oh my god! Horse. If you want to just really blow my 8-year-old mind, make it a unicorn with Pegasus wings.
Yes, I was just gonna mention wings.
Oh man, like She-Ra's horse.
Yep.
Exactly.
Oh man, yeah. No, this is now the I Like Unicorns podcast. Just gonna do a hard pivot mid-show. I'm gonna talk about one of my favorite comic books, y'all. One of my favorite comic books that I definitely tell everyone to read. I don't know if I've actually convinced anybody to read it yet, but you should. It's called Wild's End, written by Dan Abnett.
That's a really good one. Yeah.
Thank you. Illustrated by Ian J. Colbard. And basically it's War of the Worlds, but with animals.
Yeah.
Who wear people clothes and live in people's houses. And the aesthetic is 1930s Britain. And
okay, you have to read Iron or the War After. If you like that one, you have to read Iron.
I will add it to my list, but I'm just saying, like, if, like, you know, Wild's End is really like, if you have even the faintest knowledge about H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds, you're going to read this and be like, this is War of the Worlds. And you're right, but why do you care? Like, it's a really cute book. The animals are in lovely tweed suits. One of them's a rabbit. Keeping with our theme. But I just really like the art style in this. Like, the lines are pretty clean. The way that, you know, a lot of the action takes place at night, and the aliens that land have kind of like, you know, again, it's basically War of the Worlds. So they've got like long spindly legs, and like the top of them is like these glowing lanterns. And I don't know, I really like when colorists can do a great job demonstrating, you know, luminosity. You know, the kind of the opposite of what Danny was talking about earlier, talking about how Jock does really well with shadow. I really like when light as a visual element is like very clearly present, and you look at something, and even though it's a flat comic book image, you're like, oh, it's glowing. And I felt like a lot of that while reading Wild's End, and there's all these just really, really beautiful like royal blue tones to make the different gradients of night. So it's just like, yeah, like we all know the plot already basically, except this time it's animals. But for me, it's really the color palette and kind of the aesthetics of the whole thing that appeal to me about that.
Well, I just borrowed Volume 1 from Comixology Unlimited, so I will let you know what I think, because it does look great. I like Dan Abnett's stories, so I'm fully on board with this.
Yeah.
Did you guys ever read the Autumnlands Tooth and Claw from Image?
I bought it because you told me to, and I haven't read it yet, but it is on my pile. I can add that onto the top of my pile list. I have a copy now.
No, I have not heard of that one. That was a title that is new to me.
Okay, do a quick pitch.
Yeah, so writer is Kurt Busiek, and artists are Benjamin Dewey and Jordi Belair. And it's basically a high fantasy series where in this society where everyone's animals and they're wearing clothes, so I feel like it's hitting our key metrics. Their world is in peril, and so all of these wizards reach through time to bring back a legendary hero, and everyone's like, what kind of animal it's going to be? Oh, is it going to be a lion? Everyone thinks it's going to be one of them. And then something unexpected happens, and I cannot spoil it for you.
Dun,
But
dun, dun.
so in this shattered, besieged city, this legendary heroes, their only hope of survival, and possibly the whole world's like what's going to happen. I will say it didn't go for that long. There's only 2 volumes, so it ran from 2015 to 2017.
I feel like that's the case of so many good Image books and stuff from Boom Studios too, where you're just like, this was so good, and then it got canceled.
Yeah.
Or like, that could be a whole show. I was just about to go off on a tangent about From Under Mountains, and I was like, nope, we'll be here all day.
Yeah, I really like in this one, the costuming is very like high fantasy. So not only are they wearing clothes, but they're wearing like really intricate, like cultural designs that go with their different cultures with these different animals. And it's very, the art is very good.
I would like to talk about my final pick for this show, which was another one where it's like I couldn't believe it was wasn't the first thing that came to my mind. Like I was slow on the uptake about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and then it took me like a good week to come up with the Donald Duck comic books and the Scrooge McDuck comic books, specifically the ones by Carl Barks, because that's now a soapbox I'll never leave. So Disney did a prolific amount of comic books in the mid-20th century. And actually their comic book publishing unit is still like really going strong and is very popular in Europe, I think more so than the United States. But some of the most like fleshed out world building of the Disney characters has been the Donald Duck comics, because basically Donald Duck and the Duck family tree, they're all people, but they happen to look like ducks. Like I think like aside from the fact that they don't wear pants, like they're all wearing people clothes. They're living in people houses. Scrooge McDuck has that big like pool full of gold coins to dive into. Like, it's basically like a fantasy people series. And you know, I've talked about those books on the show before, but what I really like about them is that they are just like great adventure stories.
The only comics I ever actually had as a child, so I got into reading comics as I do now much later when I was already in my 20s, and the only comics I owned as a child and read were Disney comics. And they were all specifically like one shots teaching you something. So like I had a comic that was about like Mickey and Goofy and those guys going to a recycling plant and learning all about recycling, and some other ones along those lines that were all like kind of teaching you. But I read them a bunch of times. I liked them, but
did you learn lessons about recycling?
I did learn about recycling and how important it is to save our planet. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so the Disney characters actually have an interesting like coda to our what counts as an anthropomorphic animal book, because you have Goofy, who is a dog wearing people clothes, walking upright like a people, living in a people house, and then you have Pluto, also a dog, very much acting like a dog, not interacting with the other characters, leash, collar, everything. So
weird.
Cognitive dissonance.
It never struck me as strange as a child. Yeah.
No, when you think about it, you're like, oh, I have
It wasn't until Goofy got his own movie that I was like, wait a minute.
The Goofy movie was great.
Yeah.
All right. Any last thoughts on our topic?
I have one more to move from Disney to back to Warner Brothers.
Okay.
I read Captain Carrot and the final arc because I just love the fact that Captain Carrot exists in the Zoo Crew. This is by
I'm sorry, did you say Zoo Crew?
The Zoo Crew. That's his group. Yes. This book is by Bill Morrison with pencils by Scott Shaw, inks by Al Gordon. This was actually a Countdown tie-in, which I was not aware of until I was like in the middle of the book. But because of the premise, I just kind of kept reading it. Captain Carrot reunites the team to face a threat at San Diego Comic Con. And I was like, yeah, I am in. To give you a quick introduction, for the listeners that don't know what that is, Captain Carrot is pretty much, they have kind of their own Justice League in their world. So you have Captain Carrot, Pig Iron, Alley Cadabra, Fastback, Rubber Duck, Yankee Poodle, Little Cheese and the American Eagle. Those are the main members of the crew.
Love it.
And yeah, I just really like this because this book is full of puns. Like DC, there's somebody makes a joke like, remember that DC stands for Detective Chimp Comics, and Captain Carrot's identity is he's the editor of that. He's the main editor of DC Comics. He's a rabbit that kind of looks like the Nesquik rabbit, which is interesting. So when he eats a carrot, he turns into like this giant rabbit that looks more like Superman. And I just love that the book is full of puns. The story's pretty straightforward because like animals attack and then the league has to reunite. But it also deals with like the publishing companies in the middle of this lawsuit where they can't publish Justice League comics anymore because Warner Brothers from another dimension is suing them. And it really resonated with all the Warner Brothers stuff that's going on in the real world. And I'm like, oh my God, even the comics can't get their licensing. So yeah, this was really fun. I just love seeing them all dressed up in their costumes and they pick really interesting animals. Like one of them is a pig. Obviously we have Rubber Duck is a duck. The eagle kind of has a Homelander outfit, which I found really interesting. If you know about The Boys and Homelander and his whole thing. But yeah, I really like this book. And I feel like this was the other one I was like, so rabbits are just like the main good guy in everything.
Yeah, I definitely went into this thinking that it was going to be mice, but I think we've proved with the majority of our discourse that rabbits are actually the key anthropomorphized animal. I'm so glad that you picked Captain Carrot because I don't think I ever actually read this original run about those characters, but I feel like DC had a moment when they were really just like, we want our readers to become so aware of all the corners of our back catalog. We're going to bring back everybody as part of our weird crossover multiverse events, and you will care about Captain Carrot and the Zoo Crew, and we will make the Wonder Twins dark and gritty, and we will. I felt like there was this moment where it was like you had to know about Captain Carrot and the Zoo Crew, even if you were unaware beforehand.
Yeah, you have to continue. He was just in the Justice League Incarnate book that led up to this whole Dark Crisis. So even if you're a current reader, yes, he was part of it. Captain Carrot was an integral part of this new Justice League to save the multiverse, and I love it. I love that like they keep bringing these characters back because it's like, oh, these are all just like, heroes, and then there's a giant rabbit next to you.
I mean, there was a giant rabbit. This is the last one, I swear, and then we'll wrap up. But there was a rabbit in the original Star Wars comics from Marvel called Jackson, and he was a bounty hunter, and
he's my favorite Legends character that has not been brought back officially.
I'm sure it's just a matter of time.
Give me a live action Jackson. You cowards at Disney.
You cowards. Like, Andor's fine, but what we really want is the Jackson prequel.
Yep.
Oh, man. Well, Danny and Kate, thanks so much for joining me for this raucous and deep topic. I feel like we could keep going, but we're gonna wrap it up for today. Thank you all to all our listeners for joining us, for everybody in the chat. Join us next week for Mike, Brian, and Tia chatting about comics and whatever other nonsense comes to mind. You can follow us on Twitter. Danny is at Echo Spider. Kara is at Kara S. Sam. You could follow the show at IRCB Podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram and TikTok.
This episode first aired on Patreon and is possible because of our wonderful patrons. Join today for our exclusive series like IRCB Movie Club, Saga of Saga, and more. Join at patreon.com/IRCB podcast.
If you haven't already, please rate and review our show 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, because we deserve it. We brought you this hot content.
Join the IRCB Discord community to chat comics and more. Plus, you can listen to our episodes live as we record every week. Check the link to our Discord in the show notes.
Podcasts grow best when spread by word of mouth, so why not tell your friends, family, and local comic shop about IRCB?
Infinity Shred is the best. They do our wonderful music. We pray to thee, O great Xander, to make our crops bountiful and our podcast sound good. We decided that Xander, the editor, is now God, so we'll just take that blasphemy on our backs. Thank you to all our wonderful listeners and our patrons. Until next time, comics are good, and so are you.